Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the first week of our Enrolled with Credit option. This week we're going to be doing a lesson on social manipulation and media bias. So, social manipulation, the media can influence us without us even realizing it. And when this happens, that's called social manipulation. And so the messages, they affect our perceptions and our reactions. And so they might be consciously doing it, they might not be consciously doing it. So sometimes they intentionally will put stereotypes or opinions into TV shows or movies to make us think or react a certain way. But sometimes they do it without even knowing it, and everyone will have the same reaction or perception. And there are three different types of social manipulation: stereotyping, propaganda, and media bias. And we're going to talk about all three. So the first one, stereotyping. What we're going to do is we're going to read the following sentences and insert the word some before each sentence. So, some people with disabilities are brave. Some boys like toy cars and guns. Some Irish people drink a lot. Some gay men are neat and fashionable. Some women with red hair are emotional and dangerous. Some Asian students are good at science and math. Now we're going to read the following sentences with the word all before each sentence. So, all people with disabilities are brave. All boys like toys and car guns. All Irish people drink a lot. All gay men are neat and fashionable. All women with red hair are emotional and dangerous. All Asian students are good at science and math. Now, when we read these sentences with the word some and not the word all, then we're seeing the reality and not the stereotype. So some is accurate. Some women with red hair are emotional and dangerous, but someone with blonde or brown hair could also be emotional and dangerous. Some gay men are neat and fashionable, but some gay men might also be very messy and not care about fashion at all. People, regardless of their sexual orientation, are going to have different characteristics. So that's why it's important to notice the some. That's not a stereotype, that's reality, because some people act some way and some people don't. And then reality, that is how it is. But a stereotype was when you say all. All gay men are neat and fashionable. All redheads are emotional and dangerous. That is a stereotype, when you class everyone as the same thing. So we need to make sure we're aware of that, especially in TV shows and movies when it's happening. If they're painting everyone with the same brush, then that is a stereotype. So the definition of a stereotype is a belief or a suggestion that all members of a group share certain characteristics that group may or may not actually apply to individuals in the group. So for example, a male ballet dancer. You could say all male ballet dancers are strong and good dancers. Now, that would be accurate, because if you're a ballet dancer, you would be a good dancer and you would be strong because you have to lift and spin and twirl your woman partner if you are a partner duo. But a stereotype would be all male ballet dancers are gay, assuming that a feminine career choice interpret someone's sexual orientation. And so we know that is not the case, and that is a stereotype that is previously been used in our society. And so just knowing the difference between using all and some. So some male ballet dancers are gay, but some male ballet dancers would be straight. So our culture and media support many of these stereotypes. A lot of shows are built on the foundation of stereotypes. Like, for example, a blonde is typically shown as being a dumb blonde or a popular girl. And they're just using the stereotypes that we have in our society, and they're using those to make the character development happen quicker. So you can assume things about the character based on the stereotypes that they're showing. So there's three reasons why people use stereotypes. First is ignorance. So if you don't know members of a group, so maybe you don't know a lot about people who are really smart, and so you're just painting them all as geeks in your show. Or it's easy and convenient. So it's a quick way to tell an audience about a character. So if you're portraying a blonde character as like a popular dumb blonde, then they would do that quickly and easily, and people would just assume things about the character because of how they're portraying her. And it's also useful, so it introduces characters easily. So the same thing I said before about the blonde, it would easily show you, oh, maybe she's not the smartest, and she's a popular girl, and then we would already have assumptions about her based on stereotypes we have in our society. So it's useful, it's easy and convenient, but it also shows a lot of ignorance. Next, casually using stereotypes has a negative impact on social effects. So, stereotyping can support racism, sexism, and prejudice. Stereotyping limits people's opportunities, especially with casting and hiring. If you're a gay male and they're stereotyping you, they might say that they only want you for roles that show a sexual orientation of a gay man. They wouldn't cast you for a straight role. Same as with jobs, maybe your race or your sexual orientation would have an effect on the hiring process when it should not, but subconsciously these stereotypes are embedded in our society. And that's why we need to be more conscious of them in films and in TV shows and in our everyday lives. And lastly, stereotyping makes people mentally lazy, and that's because you're not making informed, intelligent decisions on your own. You're not thinking, I'm going to meet Joe. Joe is an Asian man, and I'm going to get to know him and see what he's like. Stereotyping would be, oh, there's Joe. He's an Asian man. He must be smart, good at math, good at science. That's all I need to know about him. That's being mentally lazy. You're making a decision about someone based on their race and a stereotype instead of actually getting to know them and maybe not finding out that he's super into video games that you're also into and stuff like that. So, this is an example of racial stereotyping, so we're going to watch a video on it.
In the summertime, when the weather is hot, you can stretch right up and touch the sky. When the weather's fine, you got women on your mind. Have a drink, have a drive, go out and see what you can find. If a daddy's rich, take her out for a meal. If a daddy's poor, just do what you feel. Speed along the lake, you can down or a turn of 25. When the sun goes down, you can make it good and live by. We're not bad people, we're not dirty, we're not mean. We love everybody, but we do as we please. When the weather's fine, we go fishing or go swimming in the sea. We're always happy, life's for living, yeah, that's our philosophy. Sing along with us, dee-dee-dee-dee-dee, da-da-da-da-da, yeah, we're happy. Da-da-da, dee-da-da-dee-da-da-da-da. Da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da-da. All right, When the winter's here, yeah, it's party time. Bring a bottle, wag your back, 'cause it'll soon be summertime, and we'll sing again. We go driving, or maybe we'll settle down. If she's rich, if she's nice, bring your friends, and we'll all go into town. In the summertime, when the weather is hot, you can stretch right up and touch the sky. When the weather's fine, you got women on your mind. Have a drink, have a drive, go out and see what you can find. If a daddy's rich, take her out for a meal. If a daddy's poor, just do what you feel. Speed along the lane, you can down or a turn of 25. When the sun goes down, you can make it good and live by. When I please, when the weather's fine, we go fishing or go swimming in the sea. We're always happy, life's for living, yeah, that's our philosophy. Sing along with us, dee-dee-dee-dee-dee, da-da-da-da-da, yeah, we're happy, da-da-da, dee-da-da-dee-da-da-da-da.
So that video showed us how racial stereotyping has been evident from the 70s and it's still evident today. And so that's something we need to be aware of when we're watching our advertisements. So the next one is an example of gender stereotyping.
Now, we can probably all think of adverts that portray women as always in the kitchen or men failing at simple household tasks. Well, now the Advertising Standards Authority is to crack down on ads that feature stereotypical gender roles. A review carried out by the ASA has suggested that these commercials have a cost for the individual, the economy, and society. Here's our media correspondent, David Silito.
Oven bride, so easy. A man can do it.
So easy, a man could do it? Or this, girls do ballet, and of course boys, maths. Or this. The Advertising Standards Authority is looking at tightening up its rules on how men and women are portrayed in adverts.
Women, don't expect any help on a Thursday. It's going to be okay for an ad to show a woman shopping or cleaning. It's going to be okay for an ad to show a man doing a DIY task in the home. What we're going to be looking at is ads that go beyond that, ads that paint a picture that it's for example, the woman's role to tidy up after her family who trashed the house. That's her job in life. We're worried about that sort of depiction. Similarly, ads that mock men for being hopeless at performing straightforward parental or household tasks just because they're a man.
Look like a girl, but think like a man if you want to be a boss. Or this, are you beach body ready? The ASA's concerns are about stereotypes or ads that pressurise women and men to look and act in a certain way. Of course, things have changed since an era that produced this, but the question is, what's the dividing line?
How can such a pretty wife make such bad coffee?
I heard that.
Nanette Newman spent years over a washing-up bowl. At what point does that become gender stereotyping?
One of the arguments is that ads are too orientated towards making women buy products that are for cleaning the loo, cleaning the house, washing up and everything. Well, so what, really? People can either take it in or not, and they're very often those women who are watching those ads, their husband's in the kitchen doing the washing up anyway.
And some feel the ASA is beginning to stray into politics.
Its primary role is to ensure that advertisers aren't misleading their audience. They shouldn't be making arbitrary judgments about gender stereotypes that they randomly decide they don't like. It's got nothing to do with them. This is just an organisation who's trying to put the left-wing agenda onto the free market, and it has no place there.
A move then against the sexist ad. The challenge is deciding what that exactly means. David Silito, BBC News.
So in this video, we see the typical gender stereotypes being portrayed in ads. Women are the keepers of the house and men are the ones who do the construction or carpentry or DIY projects, stuff like that. They're not to be cleaning up, and those typical stereotypes that we're well aware of, and they're still very prevalent in advertisements. And again, these are ones that we're more aware of, I think, than sometimes other stereotypes, and so it's just important to make sure you keep noticing those as well. So, media bias is a slating of the news towards a particular view. So remember, we're talking about social manipulation as 3 different forms: stereotyping, propaganda, and media bias. So this is the second one, media bias. And so it is making the news go towards a particular way. And so they favor one point of view or opinion. Unpopular views and stories are sometimes left out because If they don't think people are going to like it, they're just going to not even cover it. And things are covered more critically. So, like stereotyping, media bias could be intentional or unintentional. An example of intentional bias might be politics. If Donald Trump is running for an election and people who are also Republicans in the States, which is conservative here, then they would support him or not support him, and it would be intentional when they were writing an article about that. But an unintentional bias might be casting a TV series. So that kind of like we talked about earlier with stereotyping, they might not pick certain people for certain roles, and because of that, their show might not be ethnically diverse. So maybe they have a cast that is full of Caucasian or white people, and they don't put a lot of minorities in the show. They're unintentionally showing the point of view that there's not a lot of minorities in that area where the TV show is filmed. So, for example, if it was set in Chicago and it was a predominantly white cast, then people who are watching it would assume that there's not very many minorities in Chicago, when in reality there are lots of minorities in Chicago. So that would be an unintentional bias. So media bias, just like stereotyping, can affect how we see the world. And we are all biased in some way. It's not intentional most of the time, and maybe for some people it is, but hopefully it's not. We're all biased about something because we all have beliefs. For example, if you're religious and you grew up going to church, you would believe that certain things are right and certain things are wrong, and you're going to hold true to those beliefs. And that's a bias because you believe in something. It's not always a bad thing, but it's still a bias. And so an example of media bias that we kind of see a lot is maybe there's a politician who doesn't believe climate change is a real thing. And so there's something called confirmation bias, and so that's when you're ignoring the facts. So people know that there is climate change is happening. But if you're someone who doesn't believe climate change is a real thing, you think it's a hoax, then you're going to find information that confirms your belief. And climate change is a huge topic. There's both sides of the story for it. So you're going to see people who agree with it and people who don't. And so someone who is biased, they would show all the information that shows climate change is not real. And that politician would be using that information to confirm his bias. So finding information that suits your belief. So now here's a video to explain confirmation bias in a little bit more detail to give you a better idea about it.
Our minds are divided between an elephant and a rider. And while we often think of the rider as the one in control of the elephant, we often forget that the rider is only the guide. We usually call our rider consciousness and our elephant unconsciousness. And it's the divide between them that makes us think we are right when we are actually wrong. And guess what? It doesn't matter how smart you are or if you're liberal or conservative. You are first and foremost human. This means that you are also biased toward yourself, your beliefs, and your values. Bias is simply when we think in a way that leads us to be wrong. It's unavoidable and hard to recognize. There are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of different types of bias. But one of the most familiar to us is called confirmation bias. This is when, for example, you see some politician on TV denying that the climate is changing and only legitimizes the facts that support her or his point of view. But why does this happen, and why is it in our nature to see the evidence on only our side of the table? Our brains have to understand a shitload of data, but it can't. So instead, it takes shortcuts so that we can focus on what we think are the most important bits. These shortcuts are stored deeply in our unconscious mind and is the reason we create stereotypes. For example, when we grow up, we mostly see men as leaders and women as caretakers. Think about it. Can you name one female US president? How about one actor that is typecast as a stay-at-home dad? Because of these life experiences, our brains create patterns and store them in our elephants or our unconsciousness. These patterns then turn into generalized thoughts and expectations about most things, in this case of men and women. It turns out that in many cases these generalized thoughts are wrong. Women can make pretty great leaders and men can be amazing stay-at-home dads. But even if the writer understands this, it's still hard to control what our elephant believes. This explains a lot about why our brains have these patterns and why they create stereotypes. But what about why we try to prove people wrong even when we are wrong? A theory in evolutionary psychology says we evolved our ability to reason as a way to further our social agendas, justify our actions, and defend the groups we belong to. Why? Groups that work well together often beat groups that are made up of selfish individuals. In a way, we are all self-righteous hypocrites. Our elephants want us to survive so that our group dominates. Part of this means we often find evidence that supports a belief that we already have, rather than looking for the evidence that opposes our already held belief. And everybody is prone to this kind of confirmation bias, this video included. One recent example of confirmation bias is President Trump's nominee to lead the White House Council on Environmental Quality, Kathleen Hartnett-White. Ms. White doesn't believe that human activity is a major driver of climate change and claims that carbon dioxide emissions is good for the environment. On one side, you have millions of people that will immediately call this bitch crazy. But if you ask those disagreeers why, many of them won't be able to share the evidence to disprove her. Instead, they will go with their gut, aka their elephant, which can also be right, by the way. At the same time, if you were to ask that crazy bitch Ms. White why she believes CO2 is good for the environment,
satellites already show a greening of the Earth, in part from the very small amount of carbon dioxide involved with using fossil fuels.
She'd probably give you a list of her reasons, but wouldn't address the evidence on the other side of the table. She probably would also leave out the fact that she is a lobbyist for the Texas Public Policy Foundation, an organization founded by arch-conservative Christian billionaire James Leninger. This is an organization that has a mission to deregulate markets and has been funded by ExxonMobil, Chevron, and other companies dubbed the who's who of Texas polluters. She might also leave out the fact that she's a bad person and doesn't really care about how her actions affect others. For example, she voted to build coal plants near Dallas even when the mayors and officials of those areas strongly opposed it. Let's just say that Miss White's elephant is fucked up. But because of her bias, she as the writer probably doesn't even know that and probably thinks she's doing the right thing. And this is why she, you, and I are all often wrong. We forget that we can be wrong, and it's especially hard for people that have been stereotyped as smart their whole lives to admit that their elephant is in more control of them than they are as the writer. And as an expert, it might be even harder to say, I was wrong, and harder still to say, I don't know. Miss White is an expert, and so are thousands of other scientists and policymakers. But as an expert, politician, teacher, human, or whatever, it's our responsibility to make decisions and judgments that are as bias-free as possible and admit when we are wrong or simply don't know the answer. Unfortunately, those in leadership are often the ones that are least likely to do that. Thank you for watching, and please subscribe, like, and share this video. It all
Okay, so that gives us a little more of an explanation about what confirmation bias is. But just think of it as you're only showing the facts that support your belief, that are confirming your bias. So, media bias is used by news organizations, and they're often accused of bias a lot. So, there's always left-leaning, right-leaning, and then the center is where you want to be. The center is Switzerland. It doesn't sway either way. It's neutral. So CBC News, they're left-leaning, which means they're more liberal. And then Rebel Media, that's an example of one that's more right-leaning. They're more conservative. Another example of very right-leaning and conservative is like Fox News. They really support Donald Trump and everything that he does. And so there's a handout that I posted along with this lesson that will show you all the different TV news station organizations and where they land on the scale of left-leaning, right-leaning, or in the center. And the ones that you want to watch and you want to get your information from are the ones that are the closest to the center because they're telling both sides of the story. And that's what you want. You don't want to be influenced by one way or the other. So it's important to go take a look at that chart that I posted and look and see what ones lean what way and maybe take into account what news your family watches or your parents or your grandparents, and just think about, are they getting an accurate representation of the news, or is the news that they're watching skewed a little bit? So the last one is propaganda. So propaganda is intentional broadcasting of media messages designed to influence the public's views, attitudes, and reactions to a particular issue. So media bias and stereotyping was either intentional or unintentional. It could be both, but propaganda is only intentional. It only represents one side of the issue, and it will even sometimes tell outright lies to try and get people on their sides and believe in their opinion. It is not designed to help people. It's designed to control the message, and it directs people to one specific decision. So it's really trying to get people on your side, and they don't care how they have to do it or what they have to tell you, but they want you to believe what they think. So this is very common during times of war, controlling resources, and when they're sending young people off to die. When the wars happened, people who are of the age of 18, all the males tried to enlist in the army, and you had to go enlist in the army, and so everyone just had to be okay with sending teenagers off to fight in war and die. And that's not something that most people are very comfortable with, but because the news was spewing that this was the only way for it to be, it was the right thing to do, everyone was on board and everyone had the same opinion because of the propaganda that was being put in place by the media. And it was helping the government to have the power for everyone to be on their side. This is also something that we could explore with what's happening right now. We have the coronavirus going on, we have people in self-isolation, and especially in the States where it's really bad, they've been in isolation that's even more strict than ours, where they can't leave their house. And you want your public to be on board with that. The government wants people to be on board. So all of the stuff that they're saying about the coronavirus, you would hope that it was true and stuff, but in order to get the public's opinion to be with you and be like, yes, we should stay in quarantine and yes, we should support this, then there's a chance that they could be using propaganda or media bias. And that's why it's important, especially right now, to make sure when you're reading the news, you're looking at it and you're thinking about it and you're making an intelligent decision. And hopefully that's not happening, but that's just why we need to be aware of the things that can be done in the media and how they can skew our opinions. And that way, when we look at news, we can think about it critically and think, okay, is this right? Are they telling the truth? Should I be thinking this way? Or you can form your own opinion. So propaganda is used to build and retain power. Just remember, propaganda is about getting power. It's about getting all the public on the side of what the government is believing. So, and generally, the support of the public comes from what the news is telling us and telling us what we should support, and usually the news supports the government. It's not very often that the news will disagree with what the government is saying. So that's everything for our lesson on social manipulation and stereotypes. Media bias and propaganda are the three examples of social manipulation. Now, I have posted media bias examples for you that I want you to read, and there's also a chart showing who leans left, who leans right, and who's close to the center that I want you to look at. Then I also posted a YouTube video called How to Spot Media Bias that I want you to watch. And once the first two are done, you have 2 assignments this week. And the first is a media bias assignment, and you're going to be looking at some articles, a left, a center, and a right, and looking at how a left, a right, and a center are written and what views they portray. And then the last assignment is a movie analysis and review assignment where you're going to be analyzing a scene in a movie and then reviewing that movie. So if you have any questions, feel free to email me or message me on the Teams. I'm here to help. Make sure any confusion you have, you just ask me about it. And I hope you all have a great week, and I'll post another lesson again next week.